Dames en here, die akademiese prosesie sal binnekort inbeweeg. U word versoek om asseblief op te staan.
Bomma le bontate, moloko-loko wa dirutegi o tla tsena mo nakong e kopana. Le kgopelwa ho ema. Ladies and gentlemen, the academic procession will enter shortly. You're kindly requested to stand.
By the power vested in me, I hereby constitute this assembly as a legal congregation of the University of Pretoria. During this assembly, degrees and diplomas with all the associated rights and privileges will be conferred and awarded to the candidates whose names appear in the program. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, we request you to join us in silent prayer or meditation to give thanks for the achievements of our students. Thank you. As Vice Principal of the University of Pretoria, it is my privilege to warmly welcome everyone here this morning at this graduation ceremony. I would like to acknowledge in particular our honorary doctorate recipient, Professor Romer, our Chancellor's medal recipient, Pastor Mashlobo, the Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religion, Professor Lotsosa, the Deputy Dean, Research and Postgraduate Studies, Professor Himan, the Deputy Dean, Teaching and Learning, Professor Beyer, the Deputy Director, Student Services, Mr. Matekane, and then also a very warm welcome to the Attaché for Science and Academic Cooperation of the Embassy of France in South Africa, Lesotho, and Malawi, Mr. Lenay. Also, the Science and Technology Counselor of the Embassy of Switzerland to South Africa, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, and Namibia, Ms. Friedendahl. And then also the Head of Education and Research of the German Embassy here in Pretoria, Mr. Bodach. Then to all chairpersons of schools, heads of departments, directors, emeriti, and honorary professors, and all of our lecturers and their spouses and partners. Also, a warm welcome to the representative of the Student Representative Council, Juan Oosthuizen, who will present the SRC Academic Honorary Colors. And then, of course, the reason why we are all here this morning, all persons to whom degrees and diplomas will be conferred and awarded this morning. Also, a very warm welcome to your family, your spouses, your parents, and then all other parties, including dignitaries of whom we may not be aware of. Please feel welcome at this very special ceremony this morning. I now request the Dean to introduce to me the candidate for the honorary doctorate.
Madam Vice Principal, I have the honor of introducing to you Prof. Thomas Christian Roma for the conferment of the degree Doctor of Divinity honoris causa. After serving as an associate professor at the Faculty of Theology at the University of Geneva, Thomas Roma became a full professor of Hebrew Bible at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of Lausanne in 1993. Where he served as dean from 1999 to 2003. He'd been a visiting professor at the faculties of theology at Montpellier, Neuchâtel, Paris, Zurich, Mexico City, and Managua. Since 2007, Thomas Roma has been a professor at the Collège de France, holding the chair in biblical environments. In 2013, he was appointed as extraordinary professor at the Faculty of Theology at the University of Pretoria. Since September 2019, he has been the chairman, president of the Collège de France. In 2025 September, he was elected for a third term. Thomas Roma is the author of more than 400 scientific publications. Among his English language publications are Dark God, Cruelty, Sex, and Violence in the Old Testament, 2013, the so-called Deuteronomistic History, a Sociological History and Literary Introduction, 2007, and The Invention of God, 2015. He has recently published an important commentary on the Abraham Narratives, 2023. In 2017 and 2019, he co-directed with Israel Finkelstein, Tel Aviv University, excavations at Kiryat Jearim, a site associated with the story of the Ark of the Covenant. Thomas Roma's research focuses on the formation of the Hebrew Bible in its ancient context. His approach is characterized by philological and literary analysis of text in dialogue with the history and archaeology of the ancient Near East. This approach highlights the function of biblical discourses in their original context, addressing issues of identity, culture, society, and politics. This has enabled him to propose new historical synthesis, particularly on the formation of the Pentateuch, biblical historiography, and the origins of the biblical God. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the honorary doctorate on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Divinity honoris causa with all its associated rights and privileges on Professor Christian Roma. I have the honor of requesting Professor Romer to address the Assembly.
Esteemed Professor Francis Peterson, Vice Chancellor and Principal, I know he's not here, but I would like to greet him. esteemed Professor Loretta Ferris, Vice Principal Academic, esteemed Professor Ranto Lesosa, Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religion, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the embassies of France, Germany, and Switzerland, dear colleagues from the Faculty of Theology and Religion, dear colleagues from other faculties, dear colleagues from other universities, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, a warm good morning to everybody. It is with great emotion that I take the floor to thank the University of Pretoria and its Faculty of Theology and Religion for deciding to confer upon me an honorary doctorate. I'm extremely grateful to all the professors of this faculty for having taken this initiative, and this distinction deeply honors me. I considered it a recognition of my deep and sincere attachment to your institution, where I have had the honor of serving as an extraordinary professor since 2013. I came to Pretoria and to South Africa for the first time in 2011, following an invitation of the late Jury Leroux, who had invited me to participate in the ProPent project that he had created together with Professor Eckhard Otto in order to foster a dialogue between European and African research on the Pentateuch. I would like to take this opportunity to reflect on his legacy. Jury Leroux was a true humanist, an eminent scholar who brought biblical studies, philosophy, sociology, history into conversation. And the research on the Pentateuch that he had initiated here in Pretoria received soon international attention, and the ProPent model inspired at the Faculty of Theology and Religion similar research workshops on the prophets and on the Psalms, which also succeeded in connecting biblical research in South Africa with the Northern Hemisphere. With this in mind, after having been elected President of the Collège de France, I wish to strengthen and institutionalize ties between the University of Pretoria and the Collège de France by facilitating exchanges between researchers of both institutions, enabling UP researchers to come and give lectures at the Collège de France, and welcoming Collège de France professors to Pretoria. I'm deeply convinced that it is research that unites humans, civilizations, and cultures. The quest for knowledge to improve our understanding and to comprehend the world in which we live. The quest for knowledge and meaning is universal and should enable us to transcend conflicts and segregation. All knowledge can and should be subject of research and teaching. Docet omnia is Latin, is the motto of the Collège de France, a motto that can be translated as we teach everything. The Collège de France, which will soon celebrate its 500th anniversary in 2030, was founded in a spirit of humanism, with the aim of providing everyone with free access to knowledge without cost or discrimination. We are teaching freely of any cost. And if you come to Paris, you're most welcome to visit the Collège de France. Since its founding, the professors of the Collège de France have provided free instruction, which since decades is now also available online, aimed at bridging the gap between high-level research and society. Like the Collège de France, the University of Pretoria also initially adopted the Latin motto, ad destinatum persequor, which is, I strive toward the goal, inspired by a biblical text from the New Testament, from the letter to the Philippians. And in its moral compass, the University of Pretoria interprets its role based on this motto as a bridge that connects knowledge and application, as well as research and values. I could easily apply this idea to the Collège de France to emphasize that research, whose goal must be excellence, must also be guided by rigorous scientific methods, but also by ethical values such as inclusion and dialogue. Biblical research, which is my field of expertise, has a long tradition at the University of Pretoria. And I would like to say a few words about the importance of biblical research in South Africa, Africa, Europe, and the rest of the world. As you all know, today we are witnessing a resurgence of fundamentalism and fanaticism that use the Bible as an ideological weapon. Few books other than the Bible have been used to such an extent to condemn others or to legitimate oppression of all kinds. The Bible has been used to legitimize slavery and apartheid, and today some settlers in Israel rely on the book of Joshua to expel the Palestinians from their land. And in South Africa and other African countries in a post-colonial context, the status of the Bible remains a matter of debate. So the most dangerous book in the Bible, I don't know if you all read the Bible, what is the most dangerous book, is probably the book of Joshua, which describes the Hebrew settlements in the land as a conquest accompanied with the extermination of indigenous populations. This book was used to legitimize the Crusades, as well as the exterminations of indigenous populations by European settlers who made their exodus to North America. And when I first visited here in Pretoria the Voortrekker Monument, I was struck by its reliefs, which can be understood as a visual adaptation of the book of Joshua, legitimizing the superiority of a group that understood itself as a chosen people. What can be done in face of such an appropriation of the biblical text? This is where historical and archaeological research must come into play. The first step is to understand the context in which the book of Joshua came into being. Archaeology can show that historically such a conquest never took place. And textual research can suggest that the earliest versions of the book of Joshua was written in the small kingdom of Judah under Assyrian rule, that means in the 8th or 7th century BCE. It is a counter-history or a mimicry, a literary resistance against the Assyrian oppressor, in which the oppressor's own narratives and images of conquest are appropriated and turned against them. Interestingly, the function of resistance inherent in this narrative was clearly understood by the oppressed. When the colonists who had settled in America resorted to the slave trade, they sought to turn the enslaved people into good Christians and gave them Bibles or read the Bible to them. But when these slaves heard the story of the collapse of the walls of Jericho, they understood it as a narrative of liberation, and they began to sing Joseph at the Battle of Jericho, which becomes a gospel of resistance. Thus, a narrative used by the oppressors turned again the oppressors and transformed into a message of liberation. We must never forget that we are not the first readers of the Bible, and that the Bible must be understood and studied as a book, or rather as a library with a very long history. Scientific studies of the Bible, therefore, have their place at the university, and it is important that these studies take place through an exchange among specialists from all over the world. Throughout my career, I have always tried to promote these studies with an open mind, and I'm very grateful to my colleague in the biblical studies at the University of Pretoria and other universities of South Africa for enabling fruitful exchanges and new discoveries in a spirit of collegiality and openness. Thank you again for this great honor you have bestowed upon me, and this day will remain in my heart for the rest of my life. God bless the University of Pretoria. God bless you all. Thank you.
Professor Romer, thank you very much for that wonderful message this morning. I think it lands very well on fertile soil for us here in South Africa, where we have a constitution that's founded on the very values that you reminded us this morning about, and in particular reminding us that ultimately religion and theology is about finding our shared humanity, or what we call in South Africa Ubuntu, and that it should be used in the pursuit of social justice. So thank you very much. I now request the Dean to introduce to me the candidate for the presentation of the Chancellor's Medal.
Madam Vice Principal, I have the honor to introduce to you Pastor Mpikeleli George Mahlobo for the presentation of the Chancellor's Medal. Mpikeleli George Mahlobo is a seasoned South African church leader with over 4 decades of pastoral, administrative, and ecumenical leadership experience. Ordained in 1979 by the Apostolic Faith Mission of South Africa, he holds a theological diploma from Central Bible College and a Bachelor of Theology from the University of South Africa. Married to Jacob F. since 1978, his ministry journey includes serving as presiding pastor in congregations and long-standing national and international leadership within the AFM. He served as General Secretary of the AFM of South Africa 1996 to 2016 and as President from 2016 to 2021. Internationally, he served as General Secretary 2013 to 2019 and President 2019 to 2025 of AFM International. Among his significant contributions was his leadership role in the historic unification of the AFM from a racially divided body into a non-racial church. He also championed strategic initiatives such as Pastors Appreciation Month, succession planning, leadership development, cohesion frameworks, and pastoral wellness. Under his leadership, the AFM expanded its ecumenical engagement through membership in the Evangelical Alliance of South Africa, the South African Council of Churches, and the World Council of Churches. He represented the church in the National Religious Leaders Forum, fostering dialogue between faith communities and government. Beyond church structures, Mahlobo has been involved in community engagement and social justice, serving on the directorate of POPUP, a non-profit organization committed to transforming cities, and as a director of Impact Community Radio, which, among other things, supports community development initiatives. He also served for many years as chairperson of the Spiritual Services Christian Advisory Board, which oversees chaplaincy policy in the SANDF, correctional services, and the South African Police Service. His leadership impact has been recognized through numerous awards and tokens of appreciation. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to present the Chancellor's Medal to the candidate.
I hereby present the Chancellor's Medal to Mpikeleli George Mahlobo. Congratulations. I have the honor of requesting Mpikeleli George Mahlobo to address the Assembly.
Madam Chancellor, the Dean, members of the Council, Vice Chancellor and Principal, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Executive Management, esteemed academic staff, distinguished guests, parents, guardians, families, and friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My message this morning begins with the expression of heartfelt and deep gratitude to this institution for having decided to honor me in the way in which it has been done here today. we have recognized the impact that this institution is having in its immediate community, which is Tshwane, nationally and even internationally. Today, I would like to speak on a subject that I have titled Sharpening Issachar's Axe. When you read in 1 Chronicles 12 and verse number 32, you read about a group that came to the coronation of King David in Hebron. It reads, "From Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do, 200 chiefs with all their relatives under their command." The coronation of David was not merely a political ceremony. It was a defining moment in the history of Israel. The nation had emerged from a painful season of instability, suspicion, bloodshed, and division. King Saul had relentlessly pursued David in an attempt to destroy him. The transition of power had almost plunged the nation into civil war. Even after Saul's death, the enthronement of his son, Ishbosheth, prolonged the fragmentation of Israel until his assassination created a very dangerous leadership vacuum in the nation. So it was one of those leadership succession that went very wrong. Into this tense atmosphere, representatives from all the 12 tribes came to enthrone David. Many arrived with military might. Judah brought thousands armed with shields and spears. Simeon contributed seasoned warriors prepared for battle. Other tribes supplied courageous and experienced soldiers. Yet, among these impressive military contingents stood the sons of Issachar, only 200 chiefs accompanied by their relatives. Their contribution was not measured by swords, horses, or physical strength. Their value lay elsewhere. The Bible says they understood the times and they knew what Israel should do. This was their axe. The sons of Issachar possessed discernment, insight, foresight, wisdom, and strategic understanding. Some of the Jewish writers suggest that this could be related to their agricultural lifestyle, which they were involved in. And during this lifestyle, they acquired knowledge to study seasons, weather patterns, and celestial movements. Their survival depended on correctly interpreting signs and timings. Over the time, these disciplines sharpened their ability to discern not only the natural seasons, but also political and spiritual climate. While others prepared for war, Issachar prepared for nation building. They understood that Israel did not merely need another battle, it needed healing, unity, and direction. The enthronement of David represented an opportunity to end internal conflict and establish a stable future for God's people. The world today needs men and women with the insight and the attitude and the spirit of Issachar. We are living in dangerous and unpredictable times. Nations are divided. Trust in political leadership and even in institutions of justice has eroded. Wars and geopolitical conflicts continue to destroy lives, economies, and infrastructures. The resources invested today in weapons of mass destruction could have been utilized to alleviate poverty, hunger, and disease across the globe. Human dignity is increasingly being sacrificed on the altar of power, greed, and domination. In such times, God is calling for the sharpening of Issachar's axe. The sharpening must take place in institutions of learning, in places of worship, in homes, in governments, and in every sphere of society. The world does not only need stronger weapons, it needs wiser leaders. It needs people who can discern the times and know what ought to be done now. It needs individuals whose minds are informed by truth, whose hearts are governed by compassion, and whose decisions are directed by justice and social and divine wisdom. An axe that is blunt requires greater force, but produces little effect. That is what we read in Ecclesiastes 10, verse 10. The sharpening of Issachar's axe speaks of intellectual preparation, spiritual maturity, ethical leadership, and visionary thinking. It is a call to cultivate wisdom rather than violence, understanding than hatred, and solutions rather than distractions. To those whose skills have been shaped through education and training, your qualifications are not merely for personal advancement. God has entrusted you with the tools to transform society. You may not carry the bazookas or the AK-47s, but you possess something far more powerful: knowledge, insight, innovation, and wisdom capable of changing the course of our nation and the course of history. Use your sharpened axe to stop the guns in the world. Use your sharpened axe to confront poverty. Use your sharpened axe to heal divisions. Use your sharpened axe to preserve sanctity of life as well as human dignity. The sons of Issachar teach us that in moments of crisis, discernment can be more valuable than weaponry. The future belongs not merely to the strong, but to those who understand times and know what must be done. May God, through you, raise a new generation that will change the trajectory, not only of South Africa, but of the whole world. I thank you.
We were indeed very privileged this morning to be able to listen to such wonderful messages. So thank you very much, Mr. Mashlobo, for that speech and reminding us also of our duty and of the graduates' duty as they go out into the world to ensure that we uphold the correct values. I now request the Dean to introduce to me the candidates present whose names appear in the program.
Madam Vice Principal, the supervisors will now introduce the doctoral candidates. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chancellor, I introduce to you Amina Kusi Binga Mkesu, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled The Need for the 21st Century Reform Tradition to Transform Towards a Womanist Turning Point, prepared under my supervision. In this thesis, The Need for the 21st Century Reform Tradition to Transform Towards a Womanist Turning Point, the candidate discussed the 5 solas of the Reformation as interpreted by the great reformers, namely Martin Luther, Ulrich Zwingli, and John Calvin, to highlight the liberative and oppressive aspects of Reformed theologies, the universalization and distortion, suppression, or omission of liberative aspects of the Reformed theologies when introduced to Black South Africans is problematized. The Reformers' theological approach from above and their alignment with the status quo of their day was identified as having resulted in defective elements of Reformed traditions. These defective elements are part of the reasons the Reformed traditions are associated with racism, patriarchy, and capitalism. The study proposes that Reformed traditions in South Africa transform towards a womanist approach in order to address these challenges because womanist theology commits to a comprehensive liberation of all. Madam Vice Principal, I request to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Wait Kleisberg, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Der Verkündiger als Speisemeister, das Predigtverständnis und die Predigtpraxis der Wiener Baptistenpredigers Arnold Küstner. Written under the supervision of Professor Volker Kessler and myself. In this thesis, the candidate examined around 1,400 sermons delivered by Küster between 1939 and 1960, with a particular focus on his homiletical beliefs. Through an inductive content analysis, the study highlighted key themes, including spiritual nourishment, the preacher's responsibility, and the congregation's role. Particular attention was given to Küster's understanding of political preaching, especially in view of his post-war criticism of National Socialism. Kleisberg situates Küster's homiletical approach in dialogue with theological influences and broader homiletical developments. The study makes a valuable contribution to research on Küster and to the field of practical theology by presenting his theology of preaching as a spiritually grounded and socially engaged model for contemporary proclamation. Madam Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Karin Earl, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled The Real as a Portal to Life-Giving Poesis, prepared under the supervision of Professor Johan Meilan and Professor Yolanda Dreyer. In this thesis, the candidate undertook a critical investigation of the Genesis creation myth as reimagined by John Milton in his epic poem, Paradise Lost. Milton's interpretation of the relationship between Adam and Eve serves as a stage for critically engaging with the Freudian Lacanian understanding of human subjectivity. In this reading, where subjectivity is inseparable from sexuality, the study examines sex through a psychoanalytic lens as the rupture between ontology and epistemology, exposing the fundamental lack at the core of human subjectivity. From this lack arises desire, producing the perverse subjective and socio-political deadlock, the non-relation. This thesis therefore turned to Milton's poem to explore how the fear of lack culminates in the ultimate violent and narcissistic expression of desire, operating within the logic of symbolic and imaginary sacrifice. Yet, paradoxically, it is also from this very lack that the potential for transformative, life-giving poiesis emerges. Thus, from the same fracture, the real, that gives rise to the binding, symbolic, and imaginary phantasmic registers, there also arises the possibility of traversing these fantasies to live as ethical subjects, refusing totalization and closure by remaining steadfast in our fidelity to lack. Madam Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Bolanle Enang, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Pastoral Support for the Flourishing of In-Between Families, prepared under my supervision with Professor Malan Nel as co-supervisor. In the thesis, the candidate investigated pastoral care and support for families who live outside of their communities of origin and lack the support of their extended family. The study explored the experience of in-betweenness. Insights on flourishing from various disciplines were utilized to ascertain what is needed for in-between families to flourish. The study found that in-between families require pastoral support that is relational and inclusive, not only from pastoral caregivers, but also by the community for the community. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Reverend Alex Kamoga, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis title, Approaches to Children's Ministry in the Church of the Province of Uganda, a focus on the Diocese of Kampala, prepared under my supervision. In this thesis, Approaches to Children's Ministry in the Church of the Province of Uganda, a focus on the Diocese of Kampala, the candidate investigated children's ministry in a Ugandan context where 56.7% of the population is under the age of 19. Using documentary analysis and in-depth interviews with 28 principal stakeholders, the study revealed serious challenges, including inadequate training for clergy and volunteers, minimal funding, and the neglect of locally rooted practices. It was found that culturally responsive approaches such as storytelling, music, and peer-based programs significantly enrich the Church's ability to nurture children from diverse faith backgrounds. Based on these findings, the candidate developed a comprehensive model for children's ministry that addresses the whole child, integrating theological foundations, cultural engagement, and relational outreach. This work enriches African child theology by centering local voices and offering innovations that challenge the traditions of exclusion, urging the Church to invest intentionally in raising its children. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Reverend Pofodi Elias Caleb Lidiha, who has complied with the requirements of the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with a title entitled Abuse of Probationers by Church Leaders, prepared under my supervision. The candidate focused practical theology drawing from psychology and sociology, and investigating the abuse of probationers by church elders within the Church of Christ. It explores sexual, physical, and emotional and financial abuse, raising questions about whether elders who abuse still reflect the image of God, and whether the church environment studies, whether the church environment foster such a behavior. Using qualitative method, the research employed questionnaires and a case study with probationers, elders, and denominational leaders. The findings reveal that the ministerial stress, family pressures, and financial difficulties often contribute to the abuse behavior. Denominational leadership was found to lack effort, long-term intervention, relying mainly on counseling without consistent follow-up. As a result, probationers and even the families of elders remain unsupported. The study recommends incorporating psychology screening into this discernment process of the candidate for eldership, alongside training and ongoing pastoral care to address abuse and promote healthier leadership within the church. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
I have another one. Yes. I have 8. Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Sebataol, Idia Elijah Luate, who has complied with the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled A Pastoral Evaluation of Chaplain Programs of the SNDF, an Impact on Foreign Deployment, prepared under my supervision. The candidate pastorally explored the chaplaincy programs using a qualitative research approach, which rose from the theme emanating from the response of the members who responded to the questionnaires. These were mostly infantrymen, returning for several deployments. The chaplaincy program, designed in a context of HIV and AIDS, with psychological input of soldiers who had an impact on the deployment members too. Models of psychology applied came short of the address of the crux of the spiritual and religious duty. Infantry members and supporting elements generally understood that the role of the chaplains during exercise, operations, and deployment is to be where the fighting soldiers are, where they are most needed. Practical theology, utilizing a pastoral approach, became imperative for the development and implementation of SANDF chaplains program. Madam Vice Principal, I request to you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Tendai Joseph Magaracha, who has complied with the requirements of the degree Doctor of Philosophy under my supervision. In his thesis, Leadership, Succession Disputes and Economic Interests in the African Apostolic Church of Johanna Marange, the candidate explored the intersection of leadership succession disputes and economic interests. The Church's internal conflicts often revolve around different interpretations of spiritual authority and governance, leading to factions vying for power. These disputes highlight the significant role of economic resources, such as land, tithes, and donations, in shaping leadership dynamics. Research emphasizes that effective management of these resources is crucial for emerging leaders, as financial stewardship can sway congregational loyalty. Through qualitative methods, such as interviews and observations, insights were revealed into how these conflicts affect church membership and community ties. Ultimately, addressing these issues requires aligning spiritual leadership with economic responsibility to foster unity and growth within the Church, ensuring its resilience in a competitive religious environment. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you the Reverend Ezekiel Pedro Majani, who has complied with the requirement of the degree Doctor of Philosophy with the thesis titled The Causes and Effects of Domestic Violence on Adult Children, a case study of Moravian Church in Tanzania. With this thesis prepared under my supervision. The candidate proposed healing method which could be used by pastors in pastoral journeying with adult children with a cycle of domestic violence. Domestic violence is a widespread and serious issue that affects individuals across the globe, regardless of age, gender, socioeconomic status, and cultural background. Domestic violence and abuse have devastating long-term impact on the lives of women and children, and the fallout extends beyond those who are directly affected into families, congregations, and the wider community. Environmental factors may cause people who have grown up in abusive environment and with weakness or experience abuse as children to be more likely to prepare domestic abuse adults. Thus, the study proposes an effect healing methodology. Madam Vice Principal, I request to you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Tsepo Morongwa Masango Sheri, who has complied with the requirements of the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. In her thesis, Bearing Witness, Histories of Black Clergy Wives in South African Churches from 1948 to the present, the candidate historicizes the work of Black Christian clergy wives in mainline Protestant churches. It focuses on the women's organizations of the Anglican, Presbyterian, and Methodist churches. These organizations were also part of the Center of Church Engagement for Black Clergy Wives. Clergy wives were and continue to be known to support church-related activities, but they have also been ministerial leaders who have led in preaching, prayer, strategizing, and organizing subsets of the congregation. Beyond defining the role of Black clergy wives, the heart of this study offers important insights into anti-apartheid church activism led by Black Christian women. It also addresses some of the most pressing issues that the Church has tended towards in the post-apartheid era. Madam Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Judith Raisime Mnisi, who has complied with the requirements of the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled A Pastoral Perspective of Bapedi Widow in Mamelodi Township, prepared under my supervision. The candidate investigates the experience of widowhood among the members of Bapedi community from a pastoral care perspective. They explore the suffering widows endured after their husband's death, suffering that is often exacerbated by rituals that widows must perform in order to be accepted in a community. Distinguishable local churches with traditional views that regards women as inferior to men and thus reinforce existing cultural gender hierarchies. The perception may contribute to the Church's inconsistent advocacy for protection and empowerment of widows. Gherkin's shepherding model of pastoral care was used to present the scripturally grounded and contextual sensitive framework for accompanying widows through the life complexities. Kleinbell pastoral care model was used to holistically support widows in their spiritual and emotional journey. Madam Vice Principal, I request to you that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Letabo Melissa Molopiani, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Botswana and the Miracles of Jesus, a Social Anthropological Study. Under the supervision of Professors Ernest van Eck and with Professor Maki Masango as co-supervisor. In this thesis, Botswana and the Miracles of Jesus, a Social Anthropological Study, the candidate constructed a Tswana Ngaka diviner model as a heuristic and hermeneutical lens to redescribe Jesus' identity. Ethnographic field research among the Botswana people revealed that a Ngaka is a multi-identity person who performs duties such as healing, spiritual guidance, or is a community leader. Emphasizing Jesus' multi-identity instead, especially in the Gospel of Mark, the study used a multi-identity Ngaka model to critique dominant Western portrayals of Jesus seen exclusively as either a healer or a miracle worker. This study contributes to decolonizing and Africanizing African biblical scholarship by offering a culturally grounded, decolonial description of Jesus that aligns with African worldviews, particularly those of the Botswana, and thus raises alternative questions about the historical Jesus' identity. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Rudolf Petrus Momberg, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled The Letter to Titus and the Construction of Identity on Crete, a Social Identity Approach, prepared under the supervision of Professor Jacobus Kok. In this thesis, The Letter to Titus and the Construction of Identity on Crete, a Social Identity Approach, the candidate explored the construction of identity and the boundaries of Christ-following in-group in the unique environmental ubiquity of Crete. Using social identity theory combined with social scientific and cultural anthropological models as heuristic tools, the thesis emphasizes the Titus epistle's use of rhetorical techniques such as vilification and paronomasia to create social comparison and positive distinctiveness of the Christ-following in-group, constructing exclusive boundaries towards the non-Christ-following out-group. By means of inclusive prototypical values expressed in the Cretan Haustafelen, the identity of the Cretan Christ-following group was constructed with the ideal prototypical value of trustworthiness embedded in the primary identity of the trustworthy God, compared to the negative prototypical characteristic of the Cretans as untrustworthy liars. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Lebohang Patrick Montueli, who has complied with the requirements of the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled An Examination of Ancestral Callings and the Effects of Spiritual Manifestations that Can be Deemed Harmful in Gauteng Public Schools. In this thesis titled An Examination of Ancestral Callings in Gauteng Public Schools and their associated impact through spiritual manifestations, the candidate explored the causes and ancestral callings in 3 South African schools by interviewing both learners who witnessed and experienced events of ancestral callings or any religious behavior, with the addition of teachers and community leaders such as pastors and traditional healers. The primary source utilized for the research was Google Scholar, amongst others. This misapprehension and marginalization of specific cultures, coupled with the role of education in fostering diversity, are significant concepts that contributed to the development of this thesis. The responses from all interviews constituted the major basis for the study, augmented by scholarly sources to produce the study outcomes, including how ancestral callings affect learners emotionally, academically, mentally, and mostly religiously. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Zephaniah Muduri, who has complied with the requirements of the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Exploring Leadership Conflict Among AFM Pastors and Congregants in Pretoria, a Pastoral Challenge, prepared under my supervision. The candidate investigates the causes and impact of leadership conflict, focusing on Zimbabwean pastors and congregants in South Africa who continue to be affected by the split in the Apostolic Faith Mission, AFM, in Zimbabwe. Although living in Pretoria, these congregations carry the trauma of leadership conflict. Much like the children who suffer the effects of pastoral divorce, regardless of the location. Using qualitative method, a study was grounded in positive deconstruction model, Wembley narrative theory, and practical theology to connect lived experience with theological interpretation. The findings highlight the destructive impact of unresolved conflict in the church unity, while also revealing the potential for forgiveness, reconciliation, and theological reflection to transform such challenges into opportunities of growth. The study contributes to the field of practical theology, Pentecostal studies, and conflict resolution. Madam Vice Principal, I request to you to confer the degree upon the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Chancellor, I introduce to you Joshua Tepilangwani, who has complied with the requirements of the degree Doctor of Philosophy with the specialization in New Testament, prepared under my supervision. The candidate explored healing methods performed in the Holy Ghost Fire Church, Pentecostal Church, ethnographic data based on participant observation and interviews served as a primary basis for the analysis. Using symbolic ritual theory, the study finds that certain symbolic gestures have therapeutic effects, neurological speaking. Consequently, instead of being seen as false or omits, the study discovers that faith healing should be best described as symbolic ritual therapy within the context of faith. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Thank you. Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Patricia Nyandoro, who has complied with the degree Doctor of Philosophy with the thesis titled Relocation of Clergy and Its Impact on Family, a Pastoral Challenge, prepared under my supervision. The candidate examined how routine stationing within the Methodist Church of Southern Africa reshapes family life. Using a qualitative, interpretative approach, and the candidate conducted semi-structured interviews with wives and adult children of ministers, analyzing their narrative through transition, systems, stress, coping, and grief framework. The findings reveal recurrent losses, home, networks, identity, marital and parenting strain, educational and career disruption, and financial pressures, often intensified by family limited voice in the relocation decision. The study process proposes a pastoral story shaping healing model with the practical intentions at individual, family, congregation, and leadership level, and recommends orientation, peer monitoring, and policing reform that prioritize family well-being during the station. Madam Vice Principal, I request to you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you David Akelam Okini, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Transformed Theological Praxis, Competencies for Effective Integral Mission in South Sudan, prepared under the supervision of Prof. Pillay with Dr. Sukden as co-supervisor. In the thesis, the candidates explored the competencies required for effective integral mission and how the church in South Sudan's fragile context can help pastors and church leaders develop these competencies. Using an exploratory sequential mixed methods design, the study conducted semi-structured interviews with pastors and practitioners to identify context-specific competencies. It was found that an integral mission in fragile contexts requires a braided formation that unites discipleship, contextual theological knowledge, and concrete ministerial skills. The resulting model offers a practical template for competency-based theological education in South Sudan and comparable African settings. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Adrian Johan Pieterse, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Investigating the Doctrine of Impossibility and its Relevance for a Suffering South Africa, prepared under my supervision. In the thesis, the candidate explored the doctrine of God's impossibility in relation to the South African context and the COVID-19 pandemic. 3 primary scholars' work were used in this investigation, namely Dionysus, Jürgen Moltmann, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to provide a foundation to investigate the relevance of the doctrine in consideration of the concrete reality and the South African context. It was found that the doctrine of impossibility still has relevance in some sectors of society, but that the concept of possibility is more contemporary, preferred understanding. The latter concept can provide a solid foundation for investigating suffering in context. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Judy Plaikis, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Bullying and Social Discourse, a Pastoral Response and the Role of the Faith Community, prepared under my supervision. In the thesis, the candidate explored the phenomenon of high school bullying and the pastoral response of the faith community. The study explored how social contexts shape bullying behavior. Parent-child dynamics were explored through the lenses of attachment, social support, and family systems theories. A spiritual-oriented, multidisciplinary framework was developed for holistic pastoral counseling and educative counseling. The role of faith communities in the provision of spiritual and emotional support to both victims and perpetrators of bullying was highlighted. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you, oh my God, Tato Abigail Sautsi, whose thesis is Pastoral Perspective on Lived Pain in Maternal Bereavement, prepared under my supervision. In this thesis, the candidate explored the lived experience of maternal bereavement from a pastoral theological perspective, employing a qualitative hermeneutics phenomenological approach. It captures the profound emotional, spiritual, and cultural dimension of grief experienced by bereaved mothers in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. Through ethical, information-sensitive interviews, the research highlighted how the enduring mother-child bond, biological evidence through microchimerism, oh my God, and spiritual affirmation with the African Anglican tradition shaped by the grief process. The work bridged theology, psychology, pastoral care, offering an emphatic framework for supporting mothers navigating the traumatic loss of their children. Madam Vice Principal, I request to you that you confer the degree upon the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Catharina Margarita Heike van Vliet with a thesis titled Pro-Environmental Behavior of Young Adult Christians and its Impact on Socio-Ecological Transformation, prepared under my supervision with a co-supervisor, Dr. Philip Ullman. In this thesis, the candidate examined the relationship between religious worldviews and pro-environmental behavior among young adults, Christians in South Africa as well as in Germany, using qualitative methods including interviews and contextual Bible studies on Genesis 41. Insight was gained into participants' connections between faith and ecological commitment. Findings show that in Germany, pro-environmental behavior is mainstream and often rooted in personal Christian convictions. Yet, churches are perceived as disengaged. In South Africa, pro-environmental behavior is counter-normative but encouraged by churches. The interaction of belonging and trust, agency and empowerment, and religious environmental values is found to shape pro-environmental behavior. The study concludes that lasting ecological engagement emerges through embodied practices, integrating faith and ecological values, framed within a decolonized climate discourse. Churches can strengthen socio-ecological transformation by centering young people's contextual realities in the climate discourse. Madam Vice Principal, I request to you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Antoinette Wilson, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled 'N narratief pastorale evaluasie van dramatherapie vir emosionele, sosiale en spirituele weerbaarheid by vroeë adolessente, prepared under my supervision. In the thesis, the candidate investigated how a narrative pastoral approach combined with drama therapy can foster emotional, social, and spiritual resilience in early adolescence. Drawing on developmental theories and neurobiological research, the study demonstrated how creative drama could provide a transformative space for identity formation, emotional regulation, and relational growth. The study integrated narrative pastoral counseling, psychodrama, and drama therapy to develop the Drama 4 Lewe program for pastoral care that equips early adolescents for growth in relation to the self, others, and God. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, I introduce to you Francis Zangarai, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled The Concept of Salvation in Indigenous Religions as Expressed by the Karanga People of Southeastern Zimbabwe, prepared under my supervision. In this thesis, the candidate investigated whether salvation exists among the Karanga or not, and how they express and live. To arrive at the research results, phenomenology, interviews, historical critical analysis, and the participant observant approaches were employed. Informed by the responses from the respondents, it was observed that the Karanga conceive of salvation as expressed uniquely and informed by their worldview. They express this phenomenon through their ritual life and rites of passage. Essentially, gestures, symbolic actions, ceremonies, and rites of passage contain a rich world of the Karanga people's religious beliefs. The Karanga people, according to research, have something to contribute in terms of religion and salvation if studied independently. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Madam Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Divinity. Jordan Beatty. Ilda Marie Botha with distinction. Rian Grobbelaar with distinction. Madam Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Theology. Creflo Shai. Karabo Lehodi. Samuel Mapula. Tanya Meirang with distinction. Mabato Sehoa. Stevis Heath. Martinus van der Waal. Ephraim Dlamini. Khulukile Mokori. Bonang Chopo. Fori Lundy. With distinction. Nomuhle Masia. Sarah Matseke with distinction. Moelo Musia with distinction. Joshua Oluwatuyi. Natasha Singh. Madam Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the Bachelor of Theology honors. Lunati Balfour. Nkosana Mabuza. Lelani Be with distinction. Alicia Bosman with distinction. Sheldon Graham with distinction. Stephanie Jacobs. Ziandri Jacobs with distinction. Carla Smut with distinction. Inga Peter. Pilisiwe Bele with distinction. Sinenhlanhla Masola. Gaugelo Matsepane. Kabemba Mbayo. Esethu Mbulawa. Nicola Morrison. Sabelo Mtunzi with distinction. Nosphiwe Kotsana. Lesego Khadebe with distinction. Chimangazo Chikovi with distinction. Boitumelo Tsile. Gali Kulo. Malibongwe Zibi. Mpho Majoro. Koketso Manyika. John Sitwe. Madam Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Divinity. Karl Albrecht, with distinction. Monique Demsky, with distinction. MJ Nell. Madam Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the Bachelor of Theology. Mbali Bobelo. Sinen Sansafa Kude with distinction. Bonolo Lekwana. Kiamogetse Malope with distinction. Tlotlego Merahi. Buang Mokoka. Tebogo Moloto. Fatani Molaudzi. Simpiwe Nkosi. Sebenzile Nkumalo. Ronique Olivier. Latricia Simpiwe Piri. Kwezi Lomso Sitatu. Cassandra Sewele. Nonkululeko Sonakile. Sekoala Tau. Madam Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the diploma in theology. Kiabetse Apani. Buitumelo Chauke. Pindile Choshi. Leletu Dekeda. Spamandla Dlomo. Zandile Gabuza. Kwazi Gogo. Jackson Hosi. Olwethu Kulashe. Reginald Mahulela. Lebogang Maimane. Vanessa Makena. Lepogo Matlala. Sabelo Machobongwana. Anele Mazibuko. Mukhetwa Mbeshe. Muponisi Mbokot. Spiwe Mhlongo. Oyama Mlozana. Amira Mudau. Umpa Mudau. Pumla Nkosi. Zinhle Nkumane. Faith Nonyane. Gospel Radipere. Kiabetswe Ramano. Jabolo Shange with distinction. Shamaine Shekwa. Angel Tabete. Poni Tsotetsi. Lerato Zondo.
I now request the Dean to introduce to me the candidate for the presentation of the award of the Vice-Chancellor and Principal.
Madam Vice Principal, I have the honor to introduce to you Karl Ernst Albrecht for the presentation of the award of the Vice-Chancellor and Principal. Karl Ernst Albrecht complied with all the requirements for the Bachelor of Divinity degree on 28 November 2025, and the degree was conferred with distinction. Karl Ernst Albrecht is acknowledged as the overall top achiever in the Faculty of Theology and Religion for the year 2025. Madam Vice Principal, I request you to present the candidate with the award of the Vice Chancellor and Principal.
I hereby present Karel Ernst Albrecht with the award of the Vice Chancellor and Principal. Congratulations. Just turn around. Can I request all of our graduates to please rise, and let's give them a big hand for their hard work and perseverance. Thank you. Now, graduates, around you, behind you, are all the people that supported you to get to this moment. Please turn to them and thank them for their support. Thank you. Last but not least, behind me on the podium are those lecturers, those supervisors, those mentors who've walked the journey with you. Please applaud them and thank them. We have now come to the end of the proceedings. Before we close, I wish to invite all present for liquid refreshments afterwards in the marquee in front of the Rembrandt Hall. You are requested to stand for the singing of the national anthem and to remain standing until the assembly has been dissolved and the academic procession has left the auditorium. The words of the national anthem will appear on the screens. Please rise. By the powers vested in me, I hereby dissolve this assembly of the University of Pretoria.
Say Sure! The graduates have spoken. Let's give them what they want. Graduates! I'm going and more the graduates. Sure! I'm not and take it, Sanamare. Not and take it, Sanamare. Not and take it, Sanamare.